The sky was gray when little Mira sat on the cold steps of the orphanage. The air smelled of rain, and her small hands held a torn book she always carried. She had lived in the orphanage since she was 5, and now at 12 she had learned to expect little from life. The other children had friends or dreams, but Mira only had silence. One morning, the head caretaker, Mrs. Green, came walking toward her with an envelope in her hand. It was yellow with age, and Mira's name was written on it in neat handwriting. Mrs. Green looked confused as she handed it over. "Mira, this came for you," she said. Mira took the envelope and stared at it. No one ever sent her letters. Her heart started to beat faster as she opened it carefully. Inside was a short message and a folded paper with an official seal. The message said, "Dear Mira, as the last living heir of the Hillstone family, you are now the owner of the property located in Virginia. Please come to sign the documents when you can." Mira's eyes widened. She had never heard of the Hillstone family. She asked Mrs. Green, but the woman only shook her head. "Maybe someone from your parents' side left it," she said softly. For days, Mira thought about the letter. An old farmhouse in Virginia. She tried to imagine what it looked like. Maybe it had a big porch and a garden full of wildflowers. Maybe there was a fireplace that still worked. She had never owned anything before. The thought of having a home of her own made her heart feel warm for the first time in years. A week later, a man came to the orphanage. He wore a simple gray suit and introduced himself as Mr. Rowan, a lawyer from Virginia. He said he was there to take Mira to the farmhouse. The orphanage staff helped pack her few belongings into a small bag. Mrs. Green hugged her goodbye and whispered, "Be brave, Mira. This is your chance." The journey took many hours. The bus rolled through small towns, quiet forests, and open fields. Mira watched everything through the window, feeling both nervous and excited. She kept the letter close to her chest, afraid it might disappear if she let go. By evening, they reached a narrow dirt road surrounded by tall trees. Mr. Rowan said, "We're almost there." The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. Then Mira saw it. The farmhouse stood alone in the distance, surrounded by a field of dry grass. The paint on the walls was fading. The roof had missing tiles and the windows looked dusty. Still, something about it felt calm, almost as if it had been waiting for her. When the car stopped, Mira stepped out and looked at the place closely. The wooden steps creaked as she climbed them. A small sign near the door read, "Hillstone Farm." She touched the letters with her fingers, wondering what kind of people had once lived here. Mr. Rowan handed her a set of old keys. "This is your home now, Mira," he said kindly. "Everything inside belongs to you. The documents are ready to sign tomorrow." Mira nodded slowly, hardly believing his words. When she unlocked the door, the air inside smelled of dust and old wood. The furniture was covered with white sheets and cobwebs hung from the corners. But beneath the dust she could see signs of life. A rocking chair by the window, a photo frame on a table, a small doll lying near the stairs. She lifted the doll and smiled. It looked just like the one she had as a little girl. For a moment she felt a strange pull in her heart, as if something inside the house knew her. Mr. Rowan said he would return the next morning to finish the paperwork. When he drove away, the sound of the car faded into the distance, leaving Mira alone in the quiet farmhouse. The wind blew through the open windows, and the old floorboards made soft sounds under her feet. She walked from room to room, exploring every corner. In the kitchen, she found a wooden table and a shelf full of glass jars. In the hallway, she noticed a staircase leading to the attic. Curious, she climbed up slowly. The attic door was heavy, but she pushed it open. Dust floated in the air, shining in the light from a small window. There were old boxes everywhere. Mira opened one and found letters, photos, and books. Then she saw something unusual. In the corner of the attic was a small trunk with a brass lock. It looked newer than the other boxes. On top of it was a single piece of paper that read, "For the last Hillstone child." Mira felt her heart race. Was this meant for her? Her hands trembled as she reached for the trunk. The lock wasn't closed properly, and it opened easily when she turned it. Inside was a strange-looking key, a locket, and an old map. She lifted the locket and opened it. Inside was a tiny picture of a smiling woman holding a baby. On the back were engraved words that said, "You will find the truth at home." Mira didn't know what it meant, but she felt a chill run through her body. Something deep inside told her that this farmhouse held secrets about her past. As the night grew darker, she sat near the attic window, holding the locket close to her heart. The farmhouse creaked softly around her, as if whispering stories long forgotten. For the first time, Mira whispered to herself, "This is mine now." But she could not shake the feeling that she was not truly alone. Mira woke up early the next morning as the first rays of sunlight came through the cracked window. The air inside the farmhouse was cold and filled with the smell of old wood. She had spent the night curled up on a dusty sofa with her small bag beside her. The sounds of birds outside reminded her that she was far away from the noise of the orphanage. For the first time, she was free, yet something about the house still felt strange. She looked around the living room again. The floorboards were old, and some of them creaked when she stepped on them. She lifted one of the sheets covering a piece of furniture and found a wooden chair carved with flowers. It looked handmade, maybe by someone from her family long ago. She sat down for a moment, trying to imagine what life was like when this place was alive with people. She pictured laughter, cooking smells, and warm light from the fireplace. Now there was only silence. Mira remembered the trunk she found in the attic the night before. The image of the key, the map, and the locket stayed in her mind. She pulled the locket from her pocket and looked at it again. The woman's gentle smile and the baby in her arms made her chest feel heavy. She could not remember her mother's face, but something about the woman in the picture felt familiar. The words on the back of the locket kept echoing in her head. "You will find the truth at home." Just then, a car horn sounded outside. Mira ran to the window and saw Mr. Rowan stepping out of his car with a folder in his hand. He waved and called out, "Good morning, Mira." She smiled and opened the door for him. He looked around the house as he walked in. "It is old, but it still stands strong," he said kindly. "You have something special here." They sat at the wooden table in the kitchen, and he opened the folder. There were many papers, but he helped her sign only a few. He explained each one slowly so she could understand. "This farmhouse, along with the land around it, now belongs to you," he said. "If you wish, I can arrange for repairs or cleaning." Mira shook her head politely. "I want to do it myself," she said. Mr. Rowan nodded with a small smile. He gave her a few keys and a document showing her name beside the word owner. Mira felt proud but also a little scared. Owning a house was not something she ever imagined. Before leaving, Mr. Rowan walked with her around the house. They saw a broken barn behind the farmhouse, an old water pump, and a garden overgrown with weeds. He said, "This land has a long history. Many Hillstones lived here for generations. Maybe you can bring it back to life." After he left, Mira began exploring again. She cleaned the dust from the kitchen shelves and opened the windows to let in fresh air. As the breeze moved through the house, she felt it wake up a little. The sunlight made the old wooden floor shine faintly. She made herself a simple meal with the food Mr. Rowan had brought from town. Then she decided to look at the attic again. The stairs creaked as she climbed up. The attic was still full of boxes and the faint smell of paper. She sat beside the trunk and took out the map. It looked old, drawn in ink on thick paper. There were hand-drawn trees, a river, and the farmhouse in the center. A red X was marked behind the barn. Mira traced her finger over it, wondering what could be buried there. The thought filled her with excitement and fear. She looked out the small attic window toward the barn. It stood quiet with its doors half open and its roof tilted. She decided to find out what was behind it. She packed the map and the key into her small bag and went outside. The afternoon sun was warm now, and the air carried the smell of grass and earth. She walked through the tall weeds, her shoes brushing against the dry leaves. The barn's doors were heavy, but she pushed them open. Inside was dark and filled with dust. Old farming tools hung on the walls. There was a wooden cart, a broken ladder, and bales of hay that had turned brown. Mira coughed as she stepped further in. A family of birds flew out from a hole in the roof, making her jump. She laughed nervously and continued walking. In one corner of the barn, she found a small wooden door on the ground. It was covered with dirt, but it had a handle shaped like a leaf. She knelt down and tried to pull it open, but it was stuck. She used a nearby stick to push the edge until it creaked open. A rush of cold air came out from below. It was a trapdoor leading to some kind of cellar. Mira hesitated. The light from the door above only reached a few steps down. She found an old lantern near the wall, and to her surprise, it still had some oil inside. She lit it carefully with a match she had found in the kitchen earlier. The light flickered, showing stone steps that led into darkness. She took a deep breath and stepped down. The air was cold and smelled of earth and metal. The walls were rough stone and the steps were uneven. When she reached the bottom, she saw an old wooden table, some broken crates and shelves full of jars. She walked slowly, shining the light around. Then she noticed something at the far end of the cellar, a small metal box sitting on a shelf covered with dust. She placed the lantern beside it and opened the box. Inside were letters tied together with a red ribbon. The paper was yellow and fragile. The first letter began with the words, "To my daughter, if you are reading this, you are the last of us." Mira's hand shook as she read further. The letter spoke of a fire that had destroyed part of the Hillstone family home many years ago. It said that someone had hidden to protect the truth and that the secret of their family was kept safe under the farmhouse itself. Mira sat down and read the next letter. It was written by the same hand, and it spoke of a hidden room built long ago to protect something valuable, something connected to the Hillstone name. It warned that only a true Hillstone would be able to open it. The letter ended with a strange symbol that looked like a keyhole surrounded by vines. Her heart pounded as she looked at the brass key from the attic trunk. Could this be the key to what the letter spoke about? She packed the letters and the key in her bag and climbed back up the stairs. The sunlight outside looked brighter now, but her mind was full of questions. She walked back toward the house and stood on the porch, looking at the front door. Somewhere inside this old farmhouse was the secret her family left behind. She felt both afraid and curious, but she knew one thing for sure. She was not going to stop until she found the truth. As night came again, Mira sat near the fireplace. She placed the letters and the map in front of her. The fire flickered softly, and the shadows moved across the walls. She whispered to herself that this house was now her home, and she would protect it no matter what she discovered inside it. The sound of the wind outside grew stronger, and the house seemed to sigh as if it knew that the search for truth had just begun. The night was calm but filled with strange sounds. Mira sat near the fireplace watching the flames move. The letters she had found in the cellar were still on the table beside her. Each word seemed to whisper secrets from the past. The words kept repeating in her mind, "You are the last of us." She wondered who wrote them and what they meant by a hidden room under the farmhouse. The firelight made the shadows dance across the wooden walls. Mira thought about the brass key she had found in the attic. It was heavy, old, and beautifully carved with a leaf symbol that looked almost alive. The letter in the cellar had shown a similar design. She turned the key in her hands again and again, thinking about what it could open. Before she went to sleep, she placed the key under her pillow. She told herself she would search the house carefully in the morning. She wanted to know what secrets her family had left behind. When the morning came, a soft mist covered the fields around the farmhouse. The air was cool and quiet. Mira stepped outside and took a deep breath. The land looked peaceful under the gray sky, yet she could feel something hidden beneath its silence. After breakfast, she began to search every room inside the house. She started with the hallway and the living room. She tapped on the wooden walls to listen for hollow sounds. Sometimes she felt silly doing it, but she did not stop. When she reached the kitchen, she noticed a small iron hook near the floor behind an old cabinet. The cabinet was too heavy for her to move, so she went to the barn and found a rusty crowbar. With great effort, she pushed the cabinet aside. Behind it, she found a square wooden hatch that blended with the floor. It had no handle, only a small keyhole covered with dust. Mira's heart began to beat faster as she knelt beside it. The shape of the keyhole looked exactly like the pattern on her brass key. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the key from her pocket. When she pushed it into the hole, it fit perfectly. She turned it, and with a soft click, the hatch opened. A cold draft came from below. Mira lifted the wooden cover and saw stone steps going down into darkness. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the cellar under the barn, but curiosity pushed her forward. She lit the lantern again and began to climb down slowly. The steps were narrow and damp. Her light reflected on the stone walls, showing marks and scratches. At the bottom, she found a small passage leading deeper underground. The passage was long and narrow, made of old stone and dirt. The air smelled of earth and time. She could hear her own heartbeat as she walked forward. The lantern light showed symbols carved into the walls, the same leaf pattern she had seen on the key. She followed them until she reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. She placed her hand on the door and felt something carved into it. It was the same vine-shaped symbol from the letters. Mira pressed the key into a hole in the center. and the door slowly opened with a deep sound. Inside was a small chamber filled with old furniture, books, and pictures. In the middle of the room stood a wooden chest covered with dust. Mira walked toward it carefully and opened the lid. Inside were more letters, some jewelry, and a thick leather-bound diary. The first page said the Hillstone Record. She opened it and began to read. The diary told the story of her family. It said that long ago, the Hillstones were known for their kindness and knowledge of farming and healing herbs. They lived in this house for generations, helping the local people. But one day, a great fire had destroyed part of the farmhouse, taking lives and scattering the family. The last Hillstone, a woman named Ilara, had hidden their records and treasures to protect them. Mira realized that Ilara might be the woman from the locket. She turned the pages carefully. One entry said, "I do not know who will find this, but if you carry our name, remember that kindness built this house. Protect it and the land around it." The Hillstones believed that every place has a soul, and this farm's soul sleeps under its roots. The words made Mira stop reading for a moment. She felt something warm inside her chest. Maybe this was why she felt connected to this place from the first day she arrived. She closed the diary and looked around the chamber. There were paintings leaning against the walls, old lamps, and tools that looked handmade. One painting caught her eye. It showed a young woman standing in a garden holding a small child. Behind them was the farmhouse looking new and full of life. The woman had the same gentle smile as the one in the locket. Mira touched the surface of the painting softly and whispered, "Mother." Her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them quickly. She wanted to be strong. She looked back at the diary again and found another message near the end. It said, "When the land begins to fade, the child of Hillstone must awaken it again. The key is not only for the door, but for the heart of this place." Mira did not fully understand the meaning, but she knew she had to do something for the farm. Maybe the old fields could be brought back to life. Maybe this house was waiting for her to make it alive again. She gathered the diary, the letters, and the jewelry and placed them in her bag. As she turned to leave, she noticed something shiny near the corner of the chamber. It was a metal box smaller than the one she had found before. She opened it and found a small glass vial filled with dark soil. A note inside said, "From the heart of Hillstone. Plant it where the sun touches first." She carefully closed the box and carried it upstairs. When she stepped out into the daylight again, the farmhouse looked brighter. The mist had lifted and sunlight touched the land around her. She looked at the eastern side of the field where the first light of morning always fell. That must be the place the note spoke of. Mira went there and dug a small hole with her hands. She poured the dark soil from the vial into the ground and covered it again. She stood up and felt the breeze brush against her face. For a moment she thought she saw the grass around her move like it was breathing. The sound of birds filled the air again, louder than before. That night she felt peaceful. She read more pages of the diary beside the fire. She learned about the traditions her family once followed and the songs they used to sing during harvest. The more she read, the more she felt like she belonged here. But when she went to bed, she heard something unusual. A soft knocking sound came from the walls. It was slow and steady, almost like footsteps moving above the ceiling. She froze in her bed and listened carefully. The sound stopped, then started again, this time closer. Mira held her lantern and looked around the room. Nothing moved, but she could feel a chill in the air. She remembered the letters that said the truth was hidden at home. Maybe the farmhouse was still keeping more secrets. She sat down, holding the brass key tight in her hand, and promised herself that whatever was left to be found, she would uncover it. The Hillstone farmhouse had given her a home, and now it was giving her a purpose. Mira woke up before sunrise. The farmhouse was quiet, but she could still hear the faint sound she had heard during the night. It was like a slow tapping coming from behind the walls. She sat up, her heart beating fast. The sound stopped as soon as she lit her lantern. The silence that followed made her feel even more uneasy. She got dressed and went to the window. The sky outside was pale and full of early light. Mist floated above the fields and the trees stood still like silent guards. The house felt alive again, but also strange, as if it was watching her. Mira decided she needed to find the source of the sound. She took the lantern and walked through the hallway. Every step echoed softly. The walls looked old, but she noticed small cracks and uneven panels. She ran her fingers along one of them and felt a faint vibration. It was not wind or air. It felt like movement inside the wall. In the kitchen, she checked near the old fireplace. One stone at the bottom looked different from the others. It was darker and smoother. She pressed it, and to her surprise, it moved slightly inward. The sound came again, this time louder. It was not a random noise. It sounded like someone or something trying to guide her. Mira felt nervous but also curious. She pressed the stone again and heard a click. A small panel beside the fireplace opened slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Inside it was a wooden box covered in dust. She pulled it out carefully and set it on the table. The box had carvings of leaves and vines like the key and the door from the hidden chamber. She opened it and found a folded piece of paper and a round object wrapped in cloth. The paper was old and faded but still readable. It said, "To the one who stays, follow the song of the house, for it will lead you to the heart." Mira did not understand what the message meant, but she felt it was connected to the strange sounds. She unwrapped the cloth and found a small wooden disc. It had holes carved around the edge and a small metal pin at the center. It looked like a part of a music box. When she turned the pin gently, it made a soft tune, almost like a lullaby. The melody was slow and sad, yet warm. As it played, she heard the same faint tapping sound again from upstairs. Mira followed the sound. She climbed the staircase carefully, holding the lantern in one hand and the music disc in the other. The tune continued and the tapping grew louder. It led her toward a small door at the end of the hallway. She had seen it before but thought it was just a storage closet. Now it seemed to call her. She opened the door and found a small room with only a wooden chair and a window covered in dust. The air smelled old and dry. The sound stopped the moment she stepped inside. She placed the lantern on the chair and looked around. The wallpaper on one wall was peeling off. Behind it, she could see wooden panels. She moved closer and noticed something carved into one of the boards. It was the same vine symbol again. She pushed on it gently and a hidden door slid open. Inside was a narrow tunnel going between the walls. It was dark, but she could see old beams and cobwebs. The air felt cooler inside. Mira hesitated for a moment, then crawled through. The tunnel was tight, and she had to move slowly. The sound of her breathing echoed softly. After a few feet, she found a small space that looked like a secret room. Inside it were shelves with old books, a lantern holder, and a trunk similar to the one she found in the attic. She opened the trunk. Inside were journals wrapped in cloth and a small glass frame with a dried flower inside. The first journal she opened belonged to Alara Hillstone. The handwriting was neat and clear. The entry she read said, "The farmhouse listens to those who belong here. The walls carry voices of the past, not to frighten but to remind. Each sound is a memory asking to be heard." Mira read further. Another entry said, "I built this room to keep the truth safe from those who would forget it. The land must always be protected by the one who understands its heart." The words felt alive to her. She remembered the diary from the hidden chamber that spoke about awakening the land. Maybe the house was trying to guide her to finish what Alara started. Suddenly, a cold wind passed through the tunnel. The lantern flickered. The soft tapping sound returned, this time directly behind her. She turned quickly, but nothing was there. Still, she could hear it clearly, like footsteps on the wooden floor. She whispered softly, "Who is there?" There was no answer, but the sound moved again, this time toward the main hallway. Mira crawled back through the tunnel and came out into the small room. The tapping now came from downstairs near the main door. She hurried down, trying not to make noise. When she reached the door, she saw that it was slightly open. She was sure she had locked it before going upstairs. The morning air blew gently inside. She stepped outside and looked around. The sun had fully risen and light covered the field. Everything looked normal, but when she looked down, she saw footprints in the dirt. They were small, almost her size, leading from the door toward the barn. She followed them slowly. Each step made her heart beat faster. The footprints stopped at the side of the barn, near the spot where she had opened the trapdoor earlier. She knelt down and saw something shiny half buried in the ground. It was a silver locket similar to the one she already had, but with a different engraving. This one said, "For the keeper of Hillstone." She opened it carefully. Inside was a small painting of a man with kind eyes and a beard. On the back were the initials EH. She guessed it must be Alara's father, maybe the one who built the farmhouse. The locket felt warm in her hand, as if it had been waiting to be found. She took it back to the house and placed it beside the first locket on the table. When the two lockets touched, she heard a faint sound like a soft hum. The brass key on the table moved slightly on its own, turning toward the door. Mira stood frozen for a moment, unsure what was happening. Then she remembered the message that said, "Follow the song of the house." The lullaby from the wooden disc started to play again, even though she had not touched it. The sound grew louder, filling the room with a peaceful tune. The floor beneath the fireplace began to glow faintly. The light spread slowly, showing lines that formed a pattern like tree roots. Mira knelt and touched the glowing floor. The warmth felt gentle. The house seemed to breathe again. The walls stopped creaking and the sound of the wind faded. Everything became still and calm. She felt tears in her eyes, not from fear but from the feeling that the house was alive and trying to speak to her. When the light faded, the brass key now glowed softly. She held it in her hands and felt a pulse like a heartbeat. The diary's words returned to her mind. The key is not only for the door but for the heart of this place. She now understood that the heart of Hillstone was not a room or treasure. It was the bond between her family, their memories, and the land itself. That night she stayed near the fireplace again, holding the key and the 2 lockets. The tune of the lullaby still played in her mind. She felt safe now. The house no longer seemed haunted or lonely. It felt like it had accepted her as one of its own. But she also knew that one last mystery remained, something even deeper beneath the ground of Hillstone Farm. The next morning, Mira woke with a sense of purpose. The farmhouse no longer felt empty or quiet. The soft hum of the lullaby she had heard the night before seemed to remain in the walls. She held the brass key tightly, thinking about the message in the letters and diaries. The key is not only for the door, but for the heart of this place. She wondered what it truly meant. Mira decided to explore the barn again. The trapdoor had always intrigued her, and she felt that the last secret of Hillstone Farm lay beneath it. She packed her lantern, the map, and the 2 lockets. Her hands trembled slightly as she climbed the steps into the barn. The sunlight fell through the cracks in the roof, lighting the dust in golden beams. She opened the trapdoor and peered into the cellar below. The air smelled of earth and old wood, but it was not cold or frightening anymore. She placed the lantern down and climbed carefully. When she reached the bottom, she saw the stone floor she had explored before. Her heart raced as she searched for a clue to the heart of the farmhouse. She remembered the symbol carved into the hidden door inside the hallway, and the vine design on the brass key. She walked slowly around the stone floor, pressing the key gently against the walls. As she moved near the center of the cellar, the key began to glow faintly. Mira looked closer and saw a pattern on the floor, almost like roots spreading out in all directions. Her heart thumped as she knelt and pressed the key into a small hole at the center of the pattern. The floor moved slightly under her hand, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a round wooden box. Mira opened it and found a small plant inside. Its leaves were green and bright, unusual for a cellar. There was also a note. It read, "Plant me where the sunlight first touches the land and the farm will awaken." Mira smiled. She had remembered the same message from the vial she had planted earlier. Perhaps this plant was the last piece. She carried it carefully up the steps and out to the eastern side of the field. The morning sunlight shone softly on the land. She dug a small hole next to where the first plant had grown. She placed the new plant inside, covering the roots gently with soil. As soon as she finished, the wind picked up slightly, and the grass around the farmhouse began to move as if stirred by an invisible hand. Birds appeared in the trees, singing joyfully. Mira could feel the land responding to her touch. The farmhouse seemed brighter, warmer, and alive. For the first time, the fields and the house felt like a single living home. Mira stood and looked at the farmhouse. Her heart felt full. She realized that being a Hillstone was not just about living in the house or finding treasures. It was about caring for the land, remembering the past, and protecting it for the future. She now understood the meaning of the letters and the diaries. She walked back inside the farmhouse. The 2 lockets glowed faintly on the table beside the fireplace. Mira held them in her hands and whispered, "I will keep the farm safe. I will honor our family." The brass key, still warm in her pocket, seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The house no longer felt empty. It had shared its secrets with her, and now she had a purpose. That evening, she explored the garden behind the house. Though it had been overgrown with weeds, she could see the shapes of flower beds and paths. Mira imagined the garden full of flowers again, colorful and alive, with bees and butterflies moving freely. She promised herself she would restore it, just as she had awakened the fields. She also remembered the journals she had found. They were full of recipes, herb guides, and notes about the land. Mira decided to read them carefully, learning how to care for the farmhouse and its surroundings. Each page made her feel closer to her family, as if they were guiding her from the past. The nights in the farmhouse no longer scared her. The walls that had whispered before now seemed to hum softly with approval. Mira felt comforted by the presence of her ancestors and the history she had uncovered. She realized the farmhouse had been waiting for her to return, not just as an owner but as a guardian. Weeks passed. Mira worked on the farmhouse and the land every day. She cleaned the rooms, repaired the broken furniture, and planted flowers and vegetables. She watched as the plants grew strong under her care. The barn was repaired, and the animals that she rescued from nearby farms made the place lively again. Mira felt joy in the simple tasks. One afternoon, while exploring the eastern edge of the property, she found a small pond hidden behind a group of trees. The water was clear and she could see small fish swimming. She remembered an entry in the diary about the pond being a place of reflection and peace. Mira sat by the water and looked at her reflection. She saw a confident and brave girl who had faced loneliness, fear, and mystery. She smiled, knowing she had found her home. One evening, as the sun was setting, Mira placed the 2 lockets and the brass key on a shelf by the fireplace. She realized she no longer needed to hold them constantly. The farmhouse had accepted her and she had accepted it. The secrets were revealed. The land was awakening, and the history of the Hillstones lived on through her care. She sat near the fireplace, watching the flames. The soft hum of the lullaby seemed to come from the walls again, but it no longer frightened her. It was a song of peace and memory. Mira felt grateful for the orphanage that had raised her, for the letter that led her here, and for the farmhouse that had chosen her as its guardian. Mira whispered softly, "This is mine now, and I will keep it alive. I will care for it just like my family did." She smiled as the last rays of sunlight filled the room. She no longer felt alone. The farmhouse, the fields, the garden, and the hidden rooms had all become part of her. She had found her family in the stories, objects, and land they had left behind. The next morning, Mira woke early again. She stepped outside and felt the breeze brush her face. The house stood proudly behind her, the fields full of life and the garden showing its first colorful blooms. She looked at the horizon and knew that this was only the beginning. She would continue to restore Hillstone Farm, protect its history, and keep its secrets safe. Mira had started as a lonely, orphaned girl. Now she was the keeper of Hillstone Farm, the guardian of her family's legacy. She had discovered the heart of the house, the soul of the land, and the courage inside herself. She smiled and ran toward the barn, where the animals greeted her. The farmhouse creaked softly as if saying hello. Mira laughed, a sound full of happiness and hope. She had finally found a home where she belonged, and every secret, every whisper, every hidden passage had led her here. Hillstone Farm was alive again, and so was Mira's heart. She looked at the eastern fields where the sun rose every morning, the same place where she had planted the first gift from her family. She whispered to the wind, "I will never forget you. I will always protect you." The farmhouse glowed in the morning light. The birds sang louder, the flowers swayed gently, and the trees stretched their branches toward the sky. Mira felt at peace. The journey that had started with a letter and an abandoned house had ended with a home full of love, history, and purpose. Mira knew that her story had only begun, but now she was ready for everything that would come. Hillstone Farm was hers, and she was its keeper. Together they would grow, thrive, and keep the memory of the Hillstones alive forever.